Welcome everybody, I'm Abby Steele. Hello to names that I recognise that have just come in. Haven't seen you for a while, but it's really great to see you here. And welcome to any new names, people who've not met me before. Thank you so much for those of you that are coming to attend live, that's amazing. And to those of you later that are watching the recording. This is going to be part of a series of webinars that we're planning to do around this idea of interventions and really pulling out all the stops to make sure that we're doing everything we possibly can to help every child that we're working with. So this is going to be kind of like an opening webinar, looking generally at interventions. It doesn't matter whether you're in a UK context or whether you're watching in an international context. We're not talking age specifics in this webinar. We're being more open about age. And then I haven't planned the further webinars yet because I want to gather some feedback from this one. So we'll look at perhaps for another one looking at maybe more into Key Stage 2 specifically, working with slightly older children that might still be accessing the phonics. And another idea is going into more depth of working with children with more complex or severe needs. So those are my ideas for that. And by all means, do pop things in the chat, questions in the chat, comments in the chat. We can interact. Vicky will keep an eye on that, but I've got it on screen. I can keep an eye on it as well. So to get thinking, how do you feel about interventions? If you are watching this as a recording later, or you're rolling this out to in your school, perhaps you're going back and doing a staff meeting, this is a really nice starting question to think about. Just to kind of explore what it is that you might already be doing, what your experiences might be of interventions, because certainly in my experience as a teacher, the term intervention has changed over the years. It's kind of gone a bit full circle, actually. And so I've got some additional questions to help you think about this. And I'm not going to ask you to feed back in this webinar because I am notorious for once I get started, I can't stop talking. And I do not want to keep you any longer than an hour. I think, webinars should be short and sharp and let's get the information across. But while I'm chatting, be thinking about these things, or by all means chat to people if you're with people at the moment. So maybe think about, well, what is an intervention? How would you define that? Do you feel that there is a set definition these days, or has it become quite a wide open definition? Is there a definition that you've experienced in one particular school that might be different from another school? Are there any expectations around interventions in your particular school? So some schools, you might not have to do interventions, or it might be if you feel you want to, or if it's going to benefit the children. Whereas in other schools, I've experienced people sort of being told you must be doing interventions. There's been a bit of a sweep, perhaps with a bit of English Hub background, of expectation of, oh, you are doing interventions, aren't you? And that causes a bit of panic sometimes. Should we be doing interventions? Do we have to? Who says that we have to? Are they really beneficial? Who's it going to help? How's it going to work? Does your school timetable accommodate interventions? I've worked with many schools who have, they're spinning the plates. They have quite complicated timetables where they are fitting in interventions, and it works really well for them in those particular schools. And I've worked with other schools that say it's just impossible, Abby. We are so absolutely squeezed in terms of staffing, in terms of physical spaces to do interventions, and in terms of our timetable. We have so many needs, so many priorities. It's just, everything feels so fragmented when we try to run these interventions. Do you prioritize staff to be able to run the interventions in your school? And like the timetable, I've experienced different things in different schools. Some schools actually have dedicated members of staff who are literally paid just to run interventions. That is their job. And other schools do not have the members of staff to be able to do that. You might be in a situation where you are on your own with a large class of children. And then what does that look like for you? How are you supposed to run the interventions? Do interventions have to be run by another member of staff? Are there ways around that? Can we circumnavigate it? You may encounter other advisors, you may encounter other ways of doing things, other programs, other stories, where actually you are told quite firmly, you must make your timetable and you must make your staffing fit running interventions. You have to do that. And my approach has always been, you've got to look at everything on a bespoke case-by-case basis. You've got to evaluate each school, each class, and see what you can do. You can't be asked to do the impossible. We have to find ways around it. Are interventions a successful teaching strategy? What do we think about that? What does the research say about that? Is there evidence base for that we should be running interventions? What have we personally found, irrelevant of what the research says? Do we personally feel like they're worth the effort or not? And actually, on a personal level, how do you feel about it? Do you enjoy planning and teaching interventions? Part of the driver for this webinar is that the amount of people who say, we feel like we should be running interventions, or we've been told by somebody that we should be running interventions, would like to run interventions, but actually that's causing us stress because we don't know what that should look like. And we don't have the time, we don't have the capacity to plan the intervention. So we'd like a bit more support with that. Do children enjoy participating in intervention sessions? And typically I found that, yes, they do. They love a bit of extra help. They love a bit of extra practice. They love your attention in a small group situation or in a one-to-one. They do really enjoy intervention sessions, unless they're being pulled out of another lesson that they really like. So I've heard comments from children before, oh, I'm always pulled out of PE to do my intervention, but I love PE. I'm always pulled out of art and I really love art. Oh, I don't want to go and do that intervention. So is there conflict there, or are they really enjoying it? Do we think interventions are an essential feature of good classroom practice? Are they just desirable? What are the benefits of interventions? And I'm sure you could come up with a great big list of benefits. And what are the challenges they bring? And within those questions, there are lots of hints at some of the challenges that they bring. So have a little reflect on that. Like I say, if you're watching it as a recording, you can use it now to pause it and make some notes or have a discussion with staff in your school. How do we define intervention then? So you could say that intervention in the context of teaching and teaching phonics is additional teaching or support provided to pupils who are at risk of not meeting age-related expectations or making expected progress. And one of the things that I know, I recognize some names on the list, and I know that you will have encountered before, are people saying, you're running these interventions, you've selected your children because it's children that are not making expected progress. Against what measure? Is it they're not making expected progress against the program? And remember, Rocket Phonics is pitched high. We aim high and we teach high because we have found, we've got the evidence for that it brings children up and they sort of reach further than we expect them to. They do really, really well. But therefore, is that a fair measure when we're thinking about them making that progress? Sometimes that takes a long time. So to measure them against the expected progress according to the program can be a very high bar. Are they making expected progress against the pathway that we've planned particularly for them, which might be a different pathway? It might be a bit slower. We might be following Rocket Phonics in a slightly slower way with groups or with whole classes, or for example, in an international context with English as an additional language, you might be running on a much slower pathway. So it's making expected progress according to what you're expecting to see of your particular children. And that can be very individual. And yes, relating it to age-related expectations. So some key features of intervention: targeted, really, really targeted, focused on identified pupils or groups based on assessment data. So yes, using our assessment data, for example, phonics screening check, reading age, teacher assessments. Crucially, teacher assessments, you'll know that I'm really, really big on teacher judgment. You might have children that, according to the data, they might flag up fine, but you know those children and you know that the confidence isn't there, or it's not really, really secure. It's a bit wobbly. So actually they do need additional support to really keep moving them forwards. It's additional to universal teaching. So it's on top of, not instead of, high quality classroom teaching known as quality first teaching. And one of the things that you might be thinking about when you're using Rocket Phonics is the way in which you're using it in the classroom. You might already, for example, be running Rocket Phonics that you're teaching whole class essentially for the main lesson, but that when children go to do their pupil practice, they might be doing pupil practice in slightly smaller groups, or the class split in two, and working on an individual access level. So some of the children might be working at the continued level from the class input. Some of the children might be going back a little bit. So what I'm saying is you might already be spinning the plates as part of your quality first teaching. So we're then thinking of intervention on top of that, on top of what we're already doing. And therefore, the extra intervention might not be necessary because you're already got an organizational structure that you've really thought carefully about to work for the profile of your children that you've got. Or the intervention therefore might look different, and it might not look the way you think it needs to look, which is why we're exploring all these things. Specific and measurable, yes, absolutely. Clear goals, progress measures, really keeping a tight check on, because if we're going to put this extra effort into doing this with the children, we want to make sure it's actually working, that it's actually effective. But linked to this idea of time limited, that actually intervention is supposed to be for a period of time, and then you review it and look at whether it's working or not working. And actually a lot of sort of publications talk about that you do it for this time period, and then the children are fixed. They go back to everything, you know, whole class and normal, because they don't need the intervention. The intervention worked in that 12 weeks and then it's done. But linked to that, so specific and measurable and time limited, I think we really have to, again, apply it to bespoke. It's the exact learners that we've got, because some of those children are going to take a lot longer. And for some of those children, those goals and those progress measures are going to be really, really tiny steps, depending on their profile. Interestingly, it always springs to mind a little story. It was a secondary school that I was working with, and they were running some phonics intervention. And they contacted me to say, we've been running this phonics intervention in secondary school, say with the year sevens. We selected the group, we used our assessments, we selected the group, we've run the intervention, and we've run the intervention for 12 weeks. Because in our school, interventions are 12 weeks. And at the end of 12 weeks, we select different students to have a different intervention. It's the way our timetables work, it's the way we're guided. And we don't know what to do with the students who've had the 12 weeks of intervention. And I said, okay, well, how did it go? Did it work well? And they said, it worked brilliantly. We're so happy with the progress these students have made on this 12-week intervention. Absolutely brilliant. They're thriving on it. They're really doing well. And I said, okay, well, that's great. What do you think needs to happen next? And they said they felt really conflicted because it was working so well, they couldn't bear to stop it. The children had not magically caught up to age related in 12 weeks. These children were working at, 2-3 years behind age related. They had a really long way to go to get anywhere that was back on track, but they were making phenomenal progress. So the crux of the story was that we said, well, they need another 12 weeks, not because it hasn't worked. They need another 12 weeks because it is working. So we can't let that progress go. We've got to keep going with them. So we've got to take this in context, haven't we, when we think about things like time limited and the specific and measurable. Now, like I mentioned before, the driver for this webinar is that a lot of people get in touch with us and say, other programs have an intervention template. They have an intervention session, and it's great because they just give it to their teaching assistant, and the teaching assistant follows the session, and then they can do the intervention. It's there, it's in the program. And why is it not clear in Rocket Phonics? Why do you just have all these documents that talk about how to support children? Why can't you just give us the template? We just want the answer. We're frequently asked for this plan and this script for a 15 to 20 minute small group intervention session, a kind of traditional model. And that's the model of intervention that early in my teaching career, that's what you did. You did 15 to 20 minutes of small group intervention session. And it was usually after lunch in the afternoon when children were off doing PE or art, they would be pulled in groups to do maths and literacy interventions. And people say, please just tell us what to do. We don't have the time to plan it all ourselves. We shouldn't have to plan it all ourselves because you're the program. So just give us what you want us to do. And actually, our teaching assistants don't always have the confidence or the experience to plan it themselves. Actually, when I work with those teaching assistants, they are marvelous. They're doing brilliant, brilliant things. So they usually are really on the right track, but they just want the reassurance of, we just want the plan or the script. And we are working towards that in this webinar, so that these are documents that we're creating. But it's really important to me and to the team that we don't just give you that template and say, here you are, here's the magic answer. Because as I will repeat all the way through, the most effective interventions, the very best teaching you can do with your children, it's bespoke for your learners in your context at this point in time, which might be different next term or next year, and it's fluid, it might change. So how can we possibly give you a set template when you need to change it and tweak it depending on what their needs are? Imagine what would happen if we just gave you that script, that template, and we said to you, yep, go for it, run these interventions. Then you'd be coming back to us saying, we don't have spare adults, we've got such a wide variety of needs, we don't have time in our timetable, we did deliver the script, but it didn't work because it didn't perfectly match the children's needs. But how can we make a script that perfectly matches the children's needs when the variety of needs is going to be vast and it's going to be different, it's going to be changing all the time? So the compromise is, we are going to make these documents for you. We are going to put them in the program, but with the caveat that you do things like listen to a webinar like this, that you reflect, that you think, that you really engage, and you have the confidence to take that template, take that script, and make the changes and the tweaks within that to meet the needs of your children exactly. So I always think it's really good practice to be outward looking. I'm very critical of academy trusts or federations, groups of schools, organizations where there is really excellent practice going on. And those groups of schools are really good at sharing that practice amongst their organization. That's fantastic. But they often end up being very inward looking. You're only looking at your group of schools and your great practice. And I think we always have to keep outward looking as well. We need to always be keeping an eye on, what are other people saying about intervention? What are the latest documents? So here are some documents we're going to pull some bits out of. And even if these documents don't apply in your country, they're relevant to England, being sort of some statutory guidance and some guidance in England and based in England, they're still really interesting to know about. It's still useful to know that these are the types of documents, this is the type of conversation that influences the things that we do. So we'll look at the Department for Education definition from the SEND, Special Educational Needs and Disabilities Code of Practice, 0 to 25 years. What are Ofsted saying? What does the Education Endowment Foundation say? And what does the reading framework say as well? Because that's had a lot to do with phonics and phonics training in recent years. The DFE says, so the SEND code describes interventions as tailored actions or support, a means of matching special educational provision to the child's needs, part of the graduated plan, do, and review cycle. This can include extra teaching staff, specialist input, resources, or adjustments chosen to address a child's specific barrier. So this is quite encouraging, isn't it? Because it really is talking at, almost like bespoke level. So really reflecting on what is needed for individual children. Interventions are intentionally targeted. There's that word targeted again, regularly reviewed, really important, and responsive. That's what I'm saying, responsive. It can change all the time. Only continuing if they effectively enable progress before any statutory steps, such as EHC assessment, education, health and care plan. And what that does, if we go down that road, is it kind of makes compulsory, it's statutory, that then those children must have things in place and things must be tracked, whereas before it's kind of more sort of on us to track it. So that's quite good. What does Ofsted say? So Ofsted through their education inspection framework, the EIF, values interventions that build on prior learning. So I would say that links to that targeted comment. So thinking about exactly what they already know, helping students apply new knowledge off the back of what's already secure. So we're really not wasting any time, not wasting any precious time by, for example, running an intervention where it's all prior learning. They know all of it, and there's nothing in there that's the bit that they're stuck on. It's really thinking about, this is what they know, this is where they're at. Let's build that next little bit. Let's secure that little bit that we're trying to teach them in the main class teaching. Let's really get that embedded in sort of bite-sized steps. Interestingly, support well-being and student strengths, not just compensating for weaknesses, reflecting research that effective interventions address mental and emotional health as much as academic skills. So I quite liking that kind of holistic aspect to it, and that we're not just driving and, you know, whipping children with this stick, that they've got to keep progressing. It's a bit more of a holistic approach to that. Inspectors check that schools identify gaps using assessment data. So I would say, and teacher judgment, because you know the learners, but it's what assessment data, how are you choosing, how are you selecting your pupils? And sometimes it's the conversation behind that that's the most important, because anybody can look at a spreadsheet and pick off the bottom 10 children, but it's the conversations around, well, what do we know about their personality, their behaviors, their well-being, their emotional needs, what is this picture, what is this profile looking like? Then deploying evidence-based, time-limited strategies that have a clear impact on pupil progress. And in the context of phonics, that is sticking with your phonics program, using your phonics program to help you with the intervention, not having this attitude of they're struggling with their basic literacy, therefore the phonics might not be working for this child, therefore we need to jump around and try different interventions. And of course, everything bespoke, everything with a pinch of salt, because actually you may have a child that has got quite complex needs, and you've really been trying, and you have an expert comes in that can offer you something additional as well that's really, really specialist in the area of that child's need. And then you can look at how that fits together. But what we're trying to avoid is, we did have a period of time where people would flit about with the best of intentions, trying to find the right thing for each pupil, but they would flit about using different programs that were often very similar anyway, but they caused a bit of, you know, not a smooth progression, or they contradicted. Now, the Education Endowment Foundation, they say, principles for selecting interventions. So according to their Selecting Interventions for Pupils with SEND guide, interventions are most impactful when they complement quality first teaching, not replace it. So we're backing it up, we're revisiting it and securing it. We're not doing something different from it. It's sort of more of the same, but how can we tweak it to make it not feel like more of the same for our children? So it complements, it goes hand in hand with structured and evidence-based, using proven programs, so using our phonics program, or mimicking the features of effective ones. So taking the essence of, taking activities from, staying true to the principles, and having some fidelity to the way of doing things, but tweaking those things to make them effective for our children. Provide the right intensity, so group size, frequency, and duration tailored to need. And I agree with that entirely. We can't broad brush. We can't say intervention is best in groups of 5. It depends what they need. It depends on, you know, all sorts of things. Frequency. Obviously, the more often that you practice something, the more effective it's going to be. If you practice piano every single day, you're going to be a lot better at piano playing than somebody who practices it once a week. And there's loads of kind of research and evidence on that. It's obvious, isn't it? But frequency, it has to be balanced with what your timetable looks like, and your curriculum, and your pupils' wider needs, and duration as well. Because yes, wouldn't it be fabulous if we had extra time in the day, which we don't, to be able to have another, I mean, you know, I could go for another hour of phonics quite easily. And some people do suggest, you know, much longer intervention sessions. It's like another lesson. And I know that some people have done that with whole classes, where they've got a whole class that's perhaps not quite there yet. They've perhaps doubled up with an afternoon lesson and almost on a whole nother lesson. But actually, for your timetable, for your staffing, for your children, you might just do little tiny short intervention sessions. So it's nice that this is not being dictated to. There's a lot of flexibility here in choosing what we need. Closely targeted, again, targeted to pupils' specific barriers. Anecdote, I was working in a school once, and the school was having a review, like a governor's review. So some high up bods came in, and they did like an audit of what was going on. And they looked at children with additional needs, and they looked at their care plans, and they looked at their lessons. And it was so frustrating, because this school was doing brilliantly. The children were making wonderful progress. The teachers were teaching great lessons. All the cogs were turning, and everybody was very happy. But they were picked up on that actually, when they looked at some of the children's individual care plans, the targeted, you know, what it was that they needed to work at didn't actually match where those children were at. So it was something like, this child needs to work on blending. This child is not very good at blending. But when that person went to look at the child in their lessons, they were doing really well with blending. It wasn't blending that was the problem. It was segmenting. Segmenting was the target that needed to happen. So it's really, really specific. But I think that's good, because I think it's good for us to have to drill down into exactly what it is that they need. And it's not that complicated, because pretty much it always goes back to letter sound relationships. Do they know the letter sound correspondences? Can they blend? Can they segment? And can they do those things at word level? Can they then do those things at sentence level? Do they have an element of fluency with those things? So we go back to the systematic synthetic phonics teaching principles always of what is it that they can't do. And well implemented, delivered by trained staff. That comes up quite a bit, with careful timetabling and close teacher to TA collaboration. That's a really hard one. Lots of people say, you know, my teaching assistant is running a really great intervention, and it's fantastic because my teaching assistant is very experienced and they're very qualified, and they're really good at tweaking the session and being fluid with it and adapting it exactly as the children need. But if the teacher is questioned on, okay, so how is Annie doing? Because her target says she needs to work on blending. You have trust in your TA that they are doing this blending, but do you know what's actually happening and what the progress has been? It's how do we communicate with each other? That can be a real challenge, because of course time is really tight. So this is why some people do want a bit more of a structure and a bit more of a plan, so that they have that already laid out as to what it is that's going to be done. And others of us might need to think more about, when do we get that couple of minutes for communicating that to one another? When we have these review periods, do we have time to talk about it? So the EEF also says effective TA-led support. So in their guidance, making best use of teaching assistants, because it often is a teaching assistant that takes the intervention. And I've always really liked when the teaching assistant takes an intervention, because I've found that on the whole, my teaching assistants that I've worked with have been passionate and, capable, and really have thrived on working with that group and making the progress with that group. So I found that a very successful thing. Not always. I have had in the past teaching assistants that I've worked with who did not prefer to do that. That was at a time when teaching assistants didn't have such a hands-on role. They were much more admin assistants back in the day. And I had a lady who distinctly did not want to get involved with the children. She wanted to do the displays and the photographing. She was marvelous, but that was just her personality and her preferences. But EEF have this guidance about making best use of teaching assistants. And they emphasize that one-to-one or small group interventions can deliver about 3 to 4 months of progress, but only when structured and delivered with high fidelity by trained TAs. As an aside, because I am devil's advocate, and you know I speak to you all very, very openly, I find it absolutely fascinating that we are very keen to do all these interventions. We're keen to plan it all and spin those plates and fit it in our timetables and allocate our staff and train our staff and then monitor our staff to make sure they've got that fidelity and pull children out of other great lessons to go to these interventions. And the research is showing they make 3 to 4 months of progress. For me, I'm not blown away by this. I would like to see that if we're doing these interventions, that those children, for the amount of effort we're putting into it, are making 9 months of progress, 12 months of progress. So I find that quite fascinating. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. I'm just being really open with you all of like, oh, we do all this and then we just get a couple of months of progress, which gives me the kind of confidence to say to you, we can apply some common sense. If traditional interventions like the 15 to 20 minutes of pulling children out of their lovely art lesson to go and have if that for you has a longer list of challenges than it does the list of benefits, then maybe we think about a different way of doing it. Maybe we look at alternative pathways, ways of grouping, ways of having intervention that are not the 15 to 20 minutes being pulled out, ways that are the 5 minutes when they're doing the one-to-one reading, or when they're on the carpet and you direct questions, or when they're lining up for lunchtime. Let's kind of keep an open mind that there are other ways of meeting children's needs. Anyway, key components recognised in this report are short sessions, 20 to 50 minutes. That's not a short session. A short session is 5 minutes. Although also interestingly, I want to throw out there that another little story that sticks with me distinctively is that I went to a school and they said, oh, we're running our interventions this afternoon. I said, oh, great. That's, what do you do? That sounds really interesting. We do 5-minute interventions. So we pull each child on the list. So there's 10 children on the list and that we've identified, and we pull each of the 10 children in the afternoon and we do 5 minutes. I said, oh, okay. What does that 5 minutes look like? So that 5 minutes, what it actually looked like was 4.5 minutes of gathering the child, lining the child up, taking the child to another area, faffing about with some word cards, 4.5 minutes to do that, and half a minute of the child being asked to blend 5 words. To me, that wasn't really worth standing up and walking out of the room for. If you're going to have a 5-minute intervention, which I really like because I don't love pulling children out for longer intervention, I like them staying in the class and doing in all the lovely other lessons. So I would go for a 5 minutes, but that 5 minutes has got to be really time efficient. And is 5 words enough? If you say to me, but the child can't blend, so 5 words is good for, we're modeling the blending, still no, I'd still be looking for 10 words, and I can blend word lists. And the first part of the word list, I would model, and I would ask the child to do it with me. And then further down the word list, I'd say, now you have a go to do a few yourself. So I'd be looking for maybe 5 adult supported words for blending and 5 independent words for blending. And that I feel is a much better balance of time, effort, and what you're getting out of it. So all of these little tiny details, these are all the little things that we need to think about, and all the things I think we can tweak and we can make improvements with our interventions. But interesting here, isn't it? Short sessions, 20 to 50 minutes. So some people are doing 50-minute interventions 3 to 5 times weekly. And again, I do think we have to try to squeeze in, if we're going to do it, if we're going to do this little and often, all these interventions, we have to try to squeeze it in as much as we can. If we can only do it less often, then it makes sense the session would be longer. So if you only have the ability to have this group of children for intervention once or twice a week, then the session would be 30 minutes. If you are able to work with the group of children 4 to 5 times a week, you could do it for 10 to 15 minutes. See where we're going with that? Weekly over 8 to 20 weeks. I also don't know that I would set out doing the intervention with that timescale in mind. I would just set off with it and review it all the time, actually. Review it all the time, weekly, fortnightly, and just see how it goes. And just, I'd be more fluid with that. But the idea to have in our minds that we're not trying to keep them on an intervention forever. But like I said, with the secondary school, it doesn't make sense to have them on the intervention. It works really well. And then we pull them off it and chuck them back in when they're not ready. Strong training, 5 to 30 hours for TAs. Well, I think that's a huge variation there anyway, isn't it? And I think it really depends on your TAs. You might have TAs that just need an hour. You might have TAs that really do need a lot of ongoing support to build them up to where you want them to be, or to where they want to be for their confidence. So that's got to be perspective. But isn't that interesting that in this EEF report, they're quoting the importance of that training, and from 5 hours up to 30 hours of training to really be skilled in that area. And it's making a specialist, isn't it? It's enabling your TA to become really specialized in what they're doing. A lot of them already are, they just don't realize it. Well-designed lesson plans, clear objectives, and structured resources. And I think sometimes when we see that, we go, oh, we need something else. We need to have a lesson plan for our intervention. That sounds like it needs to be quite full and quite thorough and quite detailed, with all these clear objectives and all the structured resources. And what you're forgetting is you're already using a program which already has all of this structure, and it already has, the teaching and learning cycle, and it already has all of these resources. And what we don't need to do is make anything more complicated. I think a lot of the time people associate things being good with things being complex, and it's exactly the opposite. We need to keep things simple. And I really hope that's going to be a key takeaway for you from today, is the importance of keeping things simple. Right, I need to speed up because time's romping on and I'm waffling. And every webinar I ever do, I still to this day, even though I do hundreds of them, worry about finishing the webinar too quickly, being done in like 20 minutes, and everyone's like, what was that? And every webinar I do, I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got so much to talk about. So this is why we need a sequence, don't we? We'll get back on it as we go into the new year. Rigid adherence to protocols with consistent fidelity monitoring. Yes, I agree, a bit of monitoring, a bit of checking up on that fidelity, making sure people aren't going rogue. But I sometimes feel like the language that you use, rigid adherence to protocols, that sounds very formal, doesn't it? It sounds a bit scary, and it doesn't need to be like that. It just needs to be, let's check in with people running interventions and make sure they've not gone rogue, actually. Make sure they're staying focused and keeping it simple. Regular assessments to guide pupil selection and track impact, which is what phonics guidance is to do all the time anyway. But those regular assessments don't need to be heavy, time-consuming formal assessments. They can just be your ongoing teacher assessment, your observation. And clear links between the intervention content and the classroom learning. That's key. The intervention content isn't something different from what you're already doing. It's taking what you're already doing and taking bits of that and doing it again, or practicing that skill in an isolated way. Keep it simple. Reading framework says, and I'm going to whiz through this bit a little bit quicker, early identification and assessment. So that's really, really important, that we don't wait. We don't wait for what used to happen in early years. I was a reception teacher in the day when, first of all, they could start any term they wanted. So you'd have, spring starters, and you'd have summer starters. And then we would give them a full term, 12 weeks, just to find their feet and settle in, and we'd do some nice stuff. And it's really kind of shifted in our country, hasn't it? Certainly. And it might be different for you if you're working internationally, but we used to have this lovely long settling in period. And then in the last 10 or so years, we've become more and more focused on, we've got to get them started. We don't have the time. We're missing a golden opportunity if we don't get straight in there with starting the phonics teaching. And I do agree, because once I started doing that, I found children settled into routines much quicker, actually. They didn't start saying, but we just come to reception to just play all day. They got into like, oh yeah, we actually come to have some focus time as well. So I did enjoy getting on with it. But what we don't do is we don't wait 6 weeks. We don't wait 12 weeks to look at, oh, that child's really not keeping up. They're really struggling. We really start to observe that right from the very beginning, almost before we've had a chance to get going and show that they are getting it. We're really going, oh, then, you know, the first week, oh, those children maybe came from nursery knowing a lot of letter sounds. These children didn't know many letter sounds, but they're picking it up straight away. These children are just really struggling with picking up the letter sounds. We identify it almost immediately, and it enables us to start thinking straight away about that little bit of extra for them. This mantra of keeping up and not catching up, and of course that will vary depending on your circumstances, the age of children you're working with. If you're working with younger children, then we're keeping up as best we can for as long as we can. If you're working with slightly older children, they've not kept up and now we are catching up. So I think we need to be a bit more relaxed about that terminology. But the idea links into early identification, get on with it so that hopefully they keep up for longer rather than falling behind quickly. Daily structured support. So framework advocates that we should be trying to build in daily timetable catch-up or intervention sessions, ideally at the same time and place. Routine is good, children like routine, we like routine, delivered by trained staff, so that's emphasized again. Age appropriate and layered. So if you're thinking about older pupils in Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3, you're thinking about age appropriate materials. It's still all phonics. And actually, one of the things that we'll look at when we do some more work on Key Stage 2 is that actually Next Steps, although Next Steps is designed primarily for Year 2, the content of Next Steps is entirely appropriate for children in Key Stage 2 as well. Perhaps not Year 5 and 6 as much, but it will be for some children, but certainly Year 3 and Year 4. And there is so much curriculum overlap of Year 3, 4 English curriculum in Next Steps, just because of the way it all sort of layers up and we're ambitious, that it's entirely appropriate. But if you're coming to work with older children, you don't have to go right back to the beginning. You have to make judgments on sort of where they need to start from. And they do say in the reading framework, if you have pupils who are really not on track at all, they're really quite behind and they're in Key Stage 2 and beyond, learning to read is so important. It's so linked into all the other learning that they'll be doing as they go through education, that actually that swings the balance and makes it that actually you might need to withdraw pupils from other lessons and get it cracked. It becomes a real priority. Focusing on specific needs, we've seen this now in the other documents as well. So what is it that they need? Is it decoding? Is it fluency? Is it still letter sound correspondences? Monitoring, reviewing, and maintaining fidelity. So again, monitoring it, tracking it, all the time tracking it, but perhaps every couple of weeks make a note, and having fidelity to the program, which, as I hope you either already know with Rocket Phonics or you will discover with Rocket Phonics, maintaining fidelity to the program doesn't mean be a slave to the program, because in Rocket Phonics we have an ethos. We want you to think for yourselves. We want you to apply your expertise. You are the expert in your children. You rapidly become experts in education yourselves. We want you to use Rocket Phonics to support that and understand the concept of where to maintain that fidelity. So not mixing and matching different approaches, but you can have freedom and flexibility within that. So a little bit of a summary, a little bit of a checklist then, and then we're just going to apply it a little bit to Rocket Phonics. Spotting needs early, use your program, train your adults, little and often, and there's no fixed definition of what that looks like, checking progress often, link it to the classroom learning, and don't over-rely on pulling pupils out. Spotting needs early. It matters because if you don't address the gaps in phonics, they do get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I've seen that right from the very beginning in reception. That gap grows during that year, and you end up sending a cohort of children up to year 1 that can be worlds apart. And I've always felt that we can do a better job of keeping the cohort together and not having it quite so polar, not quite so split in half. There will always still be a wide range of need. And it enables us to catch some pupils. So some pupils are going to have additional needs. They are going to work at a different pathway and a different time scale. But there are a group of pupils who could keep up better if we gave them a bit more of this intense intervention. So don't wait till half-term assessments. Phonics teaching is half delivering a lesson, but half observing. You are always observing children all the time. It's what we do, and it's soaking up all that information that we get from them. You can be informally assessing every day, every week, all the time. You're just thinking, what are they doing? What are they not doing? Which children are confident? Which are not confident? Can they say the sound when I show them the grapheme? Can they show me the grapheme when I say the sound? Are they blending independently yet? Are they able to segment independently yet? Can they read and write with any fluency yet? So relating it back to where we're at with the program, but also where we're at with age related and where we're at for where we think that student should be. And you've got an abundance of resources already in Rocket Phonics to help you with this. So flashcards, you've got flashcards, you can print off flashcards, and you can do things like chop off the pictures or cover up the pictures or make a set with pictures and a set without pictures. Have some that are big, have some that are small, use them for little games and activities, cut them into matching cards. There are grapheme tiles in the teacher's guide. The sounds mat, you can use the sounds mat as a whole for all sorts of little games, or you can cut it into strips. You can make it bigger, you can keep it small. Your big book, what is their engagement like when you're going through the big book online, and how are they doing with the games? The pupil practice book is packed full of content that you can go back to and revisit. The target practice readers, you can think outside the box in terms of how you use a target practice reader. You don't have to use a target practice reader just as a reading book. You can extract just a sentence from it. You can use it to get the words that you're going to use to read with them or for them to spot in the book. You've got your half-termly assessments, which can double up as trackers. You don't have to use the half-termly assessments formally at the end of a half term. You can use them as you go along. And then there are all sorts of trackers in the teacher's guide. And I think sometimes people forget what's there. So as a little reminder, you've got trackers for letter formation, group guided reading, independent tracking and monitoring sheet, half-termly expectations, class alphabetic code progress, individual progress tracker, common exception word tracker. You don't need to use any of those if you don't want to. We're not a program that dictates the way that you have to do things, but we're providing all of those to you to say, look, tracking is really important. Here are some ideas of how you could track. I've done tracking before where I've taken the idea of one of those trackers, but had it as a big poster up on the wall and then just marked things up on the wall. Or, you can still apply what works for you. Using your program, so not going to something else. Alternative intervention programs can confuse methods, and proven programs build confidence through clear routines and progression. And it's just this sort of classic one, which is very, very difficult in the special needs world, because in the special needs world, you might get directed to try different things, and you might give things a try. But coming from the phonics world, it's the don't be fooled into trying things that are contradictory, or they dilute what you're doing, or they confuse by using a different mnemonic system. That's not a great idea. And again, in Rocket Phonics, there is so much content that you can use to extract, to do extra bits of intervention. You don't need something else. And I would argue actually that if you did go to something else and you looked at, well, what actually is it? It may well be the same types of skills, the same types of activities. We have so many words and so many sentences in Rocket Phonics across the resources. that the content of your other intervention program is already all inside Rocket Phonics. It's just that it looks like Rocket Phonics. So don't be kind of shiny bauble syndrome, isn't it? Where you see shiny baubles and you think they look better, because they're not. Trained adults, we've talked about this quite a lot today already. Some of the things that you might want to make sure your TAs are trained on. What is phonics? So going back to the basics. English alphabetic code, sound, pronunciation, and grapheme confidence. So making sure they're saying those sounds in a pure way. Paying attention to that you might have accent variation and dialect variation, and sort of acknowledging that. How does blending and segmenting work? Training in what resources there are in Rocket Phonics, because they might not be fully aware of everything. What the structure is of Rocket Phonics, how it builds up each day, week, term, year. How to listen to a child read and explore a book with them. And maybe have a think about, how does your school provide this training? And is it available regularly? There was a time when Ofsted was going around schools and they were saying, and you do lots of phonics training, don't you? And the schools were saying, yes, absolutely. We have a big inset day and we do a phonics training. And then Ofsted were getting them with a curveball of, but what do you do if a teaching assistant joins you mid-year when you don't have a planned training on? Your staff meetings are all allocated. Do you have things like some videos available that you can direct them, give them some time and they can watch some videos? Or can you get a new member of staff, you plan in some time that they can have some peer support or some coaching from the phonics lead or from the teacher. And when you're thinking about that training, you do also need to take into account people's personalities, their prior experience, and their confidence levels. When somebody comes from a different school and they've used a different program, it's a double-edged sword. So on the one hand, that is fantastic, because the more variety of experience they have, the better it's going to feed into their overall knowledge and confidence in phonics. So I like it when people have had other training and know about other programs, but sometimes those ways can become very embedded and people find it really hard to let go of the way that they've always done it. So you might need to work on, that's fantastic, let's take the principles and the essence of what you're doing, but we don't do it in that way anymore, because that is a different program with a different system and it's a bit confusing or it's contradicting what everyone else is doing. Let's look at how we do it in our school. Little and often. So again, like the piano practice, building up. After the main class phonics session, identifying pupils needing extra support on that day's letter sounds, grapheme, phoneme correspondences. It might be 5 to 7 minutes of same day keep up sessions where they just revisit the flashcards. They might blend 5 words or 10 words using the focus letter sounds, using some blending cards. They might read a previously taught decodable text for fluency. Simple, simple, simple. Just a simple activity to go back over the very targeted, specific knowledge or skills that they need. Check in progress often. I feel like we've talked about this quite a lot. What is it that they were struggling with and they couldn't do? What intervention did you put in place over the past week or fortnight? What progress have they made? What do they need to practice more of next week? Again, keep it simple, keep it manageable. Linking it to class learning. So again, intervention uses the same resources as the main lessons, although you may have made adaptations. So for accessibility, you might have made things bigger, made things smaller, added color, taken color, with or without images, reduce the amount of content visible. If a learner finds it very overwhelming to use the whole pupil practice booklet, you might just use one small section. The resources and the routines will be familiar, but you can be more focused and your intervention could contain reduced content to help with that targeting. Don't rely on withdrawal. So think about that, you know, the disadvantages of pulling children out of the other lessons. And can the intervention come at other times? Can it come very briefly after assembly, during soft starts, or after lunch, so that learners don't miss core content from phonics or from other lessons? If withdrawal is unavoidable, can we make it brief and can we make it really focused? Can we avoid it being 30, 50 minutes? Can it be 20 minutes maximum that they're being pulled out for? And can we justify why we're pulling it out for that time? So, intervention activity planner. I waffle on, bespoke, 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 don't reinvent the wheel, keep it really simple. It's got to work for your children. I can't give you the exact answers because it's what works for your children. But of course, I know you want some support with TAs, with planning these activities, delivering them, etc. So we are creating you an intervention activity planner. This will help staff plan effective structured lessons quickly. It gives them ideas of activities, basically, so that they don't go off on go rogue, but they've got a few different things to pick from to ring the changes. So it's not the same exact activities all the time, but we can still have consistency because we're still using the Rocket Phonics routines and activities. And we're focusing on the key areas of phonics mastery: letter sound correspondences, blending, segmenting. Keep it simple, keep it targeted. It will look similar to this, but this is my draft and this is the top section. So this will go off to be reviewed by the team. Everybody will have some input into it. If you have ideas, if you want input into this, get in touch. You can email into me or to the team at Hachette. And the idea is that we have 3 columns on an A4 sheet. Letter sound correspondences column, blending column, segmenting column. And under that, we have about 10 different activities that focus in on each thing. I went to an amazing session once, a training session, years and years and years ago at the SEND show in London. And the presenter there, it was the early days of the Letters and Sounds 2007 document. The presenter there had letters and sounds, and she said, I want you to look at the activities in like phase 1 or phase 2 of letters and sounds. And I want you to pinpoint which of these activities are targeting blending, which of these activities are targeting segmenting, and which of these activities are targeting letter sound correspondences. And it was such a good task because sometimes it wasn't always clear what the activity was doing. Sometimes we were trusting too much in, oh, that looks like a fun activity, and I know it's going to help with their phonics and their reading and writing. But when we're being this specific, we're really drilling down and targeting, we need to make sure that the activity that we do matches the skill or knowledge that we want children to practice. So it's useful, therefore. So your teaching assistant or the teacher could say, right, this group of children or this child, forget blending for now, forget segmenting for now. We are working on remembering our letter sound correspondences. This is where we're at. So we are going to pick 1 or 2 activities from this column that are things that focus on letter sound correspondences. And that's going to be today's activity for our intervention. You might just pick 1, keep it really simple. If you've got a slightly longer session and maybe the group that you're working with can do a bit of letter sound correspondences, a bit of blending and a bit of segmenting, you want to practice all of those things, you could work across the rows. You could pick something from letter sound correspondences and then a blending or a segmenting activity as well. So you can build a little intervention depending on what it is that they need. So that's the idea with that, is that it's a quick reference. How can we ring the changes, but we're still doing the same thing every time, really? And like I say, we'll get that reviewed, we'll get that added to. You can have a chance to input into it if you have ideas of things that you have found work really, really well. And then it will be designed up to look nice and Rocket Phonicsy, and then it will be put into the platform. So that's Intervention Activity Planner to help with that. And then the other thing that we're working on to put into the platform are some examples of scripts. There cannot be one intervention session script because it depends what your intervention is for, what the targeted things are for. But what we can do is do a couple of examples. So, for example, here is a structure for an intervention session that would be 14 to 18 minutes long. And it's based around the teaching and learning cycle that we follow in Rocket Phonics, but it's just making it more condensed, more focused. We're not doing a full lesson. We're using elements from that lesson, revisit and review, 2 minutes, warm up and reinforce prior learning using flashcards or oral blending or oral segmenting. And what we will do for this to make it into a script is we will literally put in the hello children, get yourself sat down and comfy, ready to concentrate with, we'll put in some wording that you, of course, can make the wording your own. But I know that some people literally want a script to follow. So we will script it out. But the idea is that it will be a little lesson structure like this, a little bit of teach, reinforce target knowledge and skills from the earlier main lesson, maybe using a mini whiteboard, practice for 5 minutes, so some guided practice to build fluency in word blending and segmenting using an ICANN word list, 3 to 4 minutes of application, apply the skills in a short sentence using a mini whiteboard, and then a little bit of recap and praise at the end. So that's sort of one example. Like I say, we'll add in the wording, the script. And another example here, so this is shorter, this is 12 minutes. And this is saying, right, revisit and review 2 minutes long. This one's very focused on using the pupil practice booklet, because actually the part of the original concept is that pupil practice booklet is gold. There is so much content in there that you can use later on. And often the very children who need more, they need intervention, they will not in their main lesson have completed all of their sections of practice in the pupil practice booklet. They might have done one section of practice and that took all of their lesson time. So your intervention becomes pick a section out of the pupil practice booklet, either on the day that you're doing or yesterday's day when you've got an empty section, and have some of that as adult-led. So some of it is very much the adult sort of guiding and supporting and modeling, but try to always include a little bit of independence. So you're overseeing it, but you're encouraging independence. Again, sticking to teaching and learning cycle, revisit, review 2 minutes, teach for 2 minutes, practice for 5 minutes, apply for 2 minutes, review for 1 minute. And we will add into that the script of literally the words that you can say. But let me remind you again, like in the handwriting guidance, the script in the handwriting in Rocket Phonics is to help you, to teach you how to form the letters. You're not expected to use that actual script with your learners. You are expected to tweak and modify that script to make it natural for you. I can't bear the thought of churning out robots who are reading a script without owning it and making it, it's you are the magic. So there'll be a script, but I encourage you, modify the script to work for your personality or in your school so you can keep an eye on for sort of monitoring. Just to finish off then, a couple of frequently asked questions. This is an absolutely classic. Should I focus on one skill or more? If you have learners who are not keeping up very well, they need extra intervention. Do you focus on, for example, nailing letter sounds? So child A, they know a few letter sound correspondences, but not as many as they should, and they cannot yet blend. So do you target and focus improving the letter sound knowledge first, or should you include some blending too? And then what about segmenting? Are we just, leaving that? So again, this is where we can't have the absolute golden script, the golden answer, because you have to adapt it according to need. So you might have your intervention session as 75% focusing on letter sounds, grapheme, phoneme, correspondence knowledge, with 25% of it in there as blending focus. So a little bit of blending, but mostly as letter sounds. We don't want to completely ignore the blending, but actually you might decide for that particular child or that particular group, you're going to focus 100% on grapheme, phoneme, correspondences, on those letter sounds for 2 weeks. You're going to absolutely dig deep on those letter sounds, because blending and segmenting are still being covered and modeled and practiced a little bit in the main lesson and in class. And then you might switch your intervention to an intervention focusing on blending. So there is no one set answer. It's, well, what do your particular children need at this point in time? If you focus only on letter sounds, you're missing a trick because they're not getting a blending. But if you focus across too many skills, you're not being targeted enough to get that progress in those targeted knowledge and skills. So 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. And then the other question I get quite a lot around intervention: what if my children get bored? Because sometimes the children that need the intervention have the personalities and the behaviors that get fidgety, they get bored, especially doing the same thing over and over again. So we have to think, how can we keep it fresh and engaging, but not onerous to create? We do not want people spending time creating all these elaborate, super fun activities that just aren't necessary. Some fun activities can be a distraction or they can dilute the learning. So it's not a good idea to try to make it too fun because you miss the point of the learning. Actually, your tone and your enthusiasm matters. You don't need to be like a play school presenter. Woohoo! It's time for intervention. Woohoo! It's time for bingo. You can if that's your style, but so you don't need to be all singing, all dancing. But you don't need to put across, if you are bored, don't let the children pick that up in your tone. Don't have a vibe of that. Have a vibe of, this is calm, routine, this is important, this practice is so valuable for us. I enjoy doing this practice with you. I enjoy going through these flashcards for the 5 millionth time today. I love it. So you see what I'm saying? It might actually be your misconception, that boredom, and the boredom might not be boredom. Sometimes children that say they're bored and fidgety, they're actually hungry, or they're actually tired, or they're actually a little bit hot, or they're actually dehydrated and they need a drink, and it's nothing to do with boredom. Children thrive on really simple routine and predictability, especially if there are children that naturally are struggling with memory retention or following instructions. Intervention is not the time or place for overly fun activities. It has to be time efficient. That's really important. And you need to avoid any activity that has multiple steps or instructions or new demands, because that just adds another layer of complexity onto these children who often need things keeping a bit more straightforward. So final thoughts, and thank you so much for bearing with me, and thank you to those who've had to go and had to come back and watch later, because I have run over, but you know me. Don't overthink intervention. With younger children, I used to build it into lining up times by using flashcards on lanyards, strategically positioned wall posters alongside their one-to-one reading by using individual flashcards. I can blend word lists, mini whiteboards. I would build in lots of little 1-minute extras throughout the day so that I didn't need to have these 15-minute pulling out a group interventions. So the definition of intervention is still loose and vague and woolly, and we don't have to be pigeonholed on that. Nobody's putting pressure on that unless it's somebody within your organization. And then you can go back with, actually, Abby says that we don't have to do it that way. We can think outside the box more. Remember to involve parents and carers where possible. If you can get parents and carers on board, this week we're really focusing on remembering because Tommy is struggling with and if you could just practice at home, and here is a card with on, then that would be amazing. Thank you so much. The concepts around intervention are good. So there's loads of good stuff that we've talked about today, but remember that some children will require an alternative pathway rather than a keep up intervention. You might still try the keep up intervention, but if you feel like we're trying this keep up intervention and they just still aren't making the progress, or the progress is so slow and we really need to make more adaptations to break this down more, we could be looking at an alternative pathway, and that's for another webinar. Interventions are intended to be time limited, but some children might need longer. Keep targets bite-size, because actually you're still being really ambitious with those children and you still have high expectations when you're exposing all the children to the main teaching. So remember that you're still doing that. And a final task for you, if you can find some extra homework time, is to read or reread the guidance in the Rocket Phonics platform when learners need more, Rocket Phonics program intervention guidance document. So it's it will back up a lot of the things that we've talked about today, but it's not the same as we've talked about today. So it will have different thoughts and thought processes and information that's along the same line, but is also slightly different. So do have a read of that. Thank you so much for your time. I'm going to come off the slide so you can see my face. And if anybody would like to ask any questions, please do put things in the chat. And I think I saw that Vicky had said about join the Rocket Phonics Teachers Facebook group, so you can share your ideas. Perfect idea. And also the Rocket Phonics Teachers Facebook group is a really good way to reach me. You can put questions in there or make comments. And sometimes if I've not been online much, I have to be chased to come back and have a question flagged up for me. But I do try to get to the questions and answer them in there. So that is a good way of asking a question if you have a question later, if you've watched this, for example, on record. So let's have a look at chat. Do we have any questions? Or everyone's rushing back to class. Thank you so much for managing to come. That's brilliant that you've had time out to come and watch today. Yes, we will keep you posted. As I say, we've got no firm dates for anything yet, and I haven't firmly planned anything yet, but we have talked about as a team that we will run a series of webinars. We're at kind of at the end of term now, so we'll be looking at September, October. We'll get some more webinars on the go for things like going deeper, looking at children with more complex and more specific SEND. And then our other idea, looking at Key Stage 2 as well, children who need more support in Key Stage 2. Thank you, everybody. I hope I didn't talk too fast for anybody as well. I know sometimes we have international colleagues. English might not be your first language, and I do talk very fast. But it makes it quick for everybody else. People don't get bored on a webinar because I just waffle on. Thank you, thank you. Lovely seeing your names. I hope you're all well. I hope you've been having a good year. Good. And I love that. Thank you, Lisa. I love hearing, especially reassuring for what we are already doing and where to go with interventions. I find that all the time. It's really fascinating that users of Rocket Phonics, I find, have a lot of common sense and do a lot of good things. We just sometimes need to get together, don't we, to have these conversations and a bit of reassurance that we are doing the right thing. We are absolutely right using our common sense and applying things in a bespoke way. And I'll always back you up with that if we need the welly for it.